exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly.
Broadcast from later. Weak signals are things that we observe in the world that we suspect may have a influence on futures that are unfolding. On broadcasts like this, we share our weak signals and unpack, disentangle, and talk about them. Udit, what's your weakest signal?
My weak signal isn't quite a weak signal. It's still partially formed thoughts that I'm like trying to develop a perspective on. And the area that I'm thinking about is sort of the history and the future of what people call fusion food. And basically where this all came from is that a few days ago I learned about this restaurant in Toronto closing down, which is called Gandhi Roti, Gandhi Cuisine of India, Gandhi Roti or something like that. You guys all know it, right? Mm-hmm. Or have heard of it at least. And like basically the chef closed down because of the COVID related business pressures, which is sad because it's sort of like a cult classic in Toronto. And if you've never had it before, basically it's Caribbean style roti with an Indian curry filling. It's neither Caribbean or Indian. Like that roti format does not exist in India, even though the filling is Indian. What's interesting is that even the format, the Caribbean format of rotis comes originally from India, right? It's like back in the 18th, 19th century when there was this influx of indentured labor into the Caribbean from India, China, Africa. A lot of the cooking styles came with the labor and the immigrants, and roti was one of them. And so I was like thinking about like this weird history of this roti, which is Gandhi roti, which is traces back to India, but through these two different routes, like one via the Caribbean and one from like the direct Indian migrants from North India to Toronto. And they both kind of like converged and met and created this dish, which is like kind of iconic for Toronto. And like, I guess what I'm interested in is like the way these dishes are created and like what makes them endure and like what makes them cult or iconic. And I think a lot of it has to do with what are like real limitations in terms of availability, in terms of like what like the sort of tastes and needs people have at the time and place. It's a little different from the other kind of fusion food that we think of when we talk about like the fusion food that came out of like the 70s and 80s, which was really about making foreign foods palatable to like a Western audience, you know, cream cheese and sushi and things like that. And so I guess what's my signal? I think it's a really interesting time for what we think of as fusion food right now. Basically because I think there's this, in the last like decade or so, there's been this hyper availability of ingredients through like the global supply chains and like 24-hour supermarkets, plus also access to different kinds of culture through tourism and global travel, to the point that people were like fetishizing authenticity to the point that I think was like almost senseless, because like these are the San Marzano tomatoes from like the lava plains of Mount Vesuvius, or this is like these Lagan like chili oil from like
became ridiculous.
It's like it's and it isn't like that was like what was authentic, not actually like the contextual like limitations of the time and place. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people have been talking about that right now, but like have been like talking around this idea recently because of like, you know, the breaking down of global supply chains. And also I think because of more recently, like the conversations about cultural appropriation around, you know, Black Lives Matter and like how that impacts like different kinds of like art and music and even food culture, right? So like, I don't know where this is going, but I don't know. I think there's like something interesting about like the tension that's being revealed about like fusion food, and also like where it might actually go.
You want to cancel tacos? Is that what you're getting at?
I want to cancel...
He wants to cancel Korean tacos.
I want to cancel Korean tacos.
Cream cheese tacos.
Burritos.
Doesn't David Chang didn't he long do this kind of like low-high mix of like using stuff that's available in any given environment, but then mixing it with like this high foods, like going and learning from different places in, I think it was Japan mostly, and combining it with to make this like post-authentic kind of food. Like, wasn't that already the trend?
I think you're right that it was a trend, but I guess like the reason why it might be different is that it felt like some of the combinations were just happening. Like there's like no like real context behind like the why like these different ingredients are being combined. It's purely for like making a point about the high-low combination, or because you're talking about this like ingredient, which is like the basis of this dish, right? Like this ingredient is like the core, and this is like what we're replacing, as opposed to like the overall sort of nature of the dish.
So right beside Gandhi Roti is my other favorite Indian, non-Indian restaurant called New York Sub, which has nothing to do with New York or subs, and is actually some kind of weird hybrid Mexican Indian place that like just makes no sense whatsoever. And I love the place, but it's like grimy as hell and cheap, and it's been around forever, and I have no idea what the story behind it is and how it even emerged in the first place. Like why he selected a Delhi name for like a thing.
Probably bought it from somebody else.
I don't know. It must be that. Yeah. There's like 4 steps still of like other things that must have happened to get to that point.
And the Mexican and Indian like mix is because of like that's his background, or that's
I don't think so.
No, it's definitely not his background.
I hope that place is still around. I hope they're not shutting down.
What do we think the signal here? You think something's going on here, and that something that's going on is just in the midst of the conversation? Like, is there a particular thing you're seeing? Because it doesn't seem like it is. It seems like you correct me if I'm wrong, but that the closing of Gandhi Roti is just something that kind of brought this to your attention. It's not really connected to...
It's not really connected. It was just like something I was thinking about. Like it was like, I read that like yesterday, and then I was like thinking about like, what does fusion food mean now? Was that really fusion?
Right. Yeah, I wonder.
Like, just because someone called it fusion food, right? And then I started thinking about what is fusion food, and like, is it actually fusion?
Yeah.
Like, isn't all food fusion at some point? Because like a lot of the things that we think of as like of being like iconic or classic dishes are like actually not even that old, and have been formed because have been created because of like some need at the time or some limitation of the time. And I guess like that would be like, again, like going back to the point that Valis was making about David Chang's thing, which is like, it's still thinking about food as like the end goal is still to create a dish as opposed to like coming from an actual need of the time. Like it's, and maybe it's like hard to separate those out, but
it would be fun to like start a kitchen, start a restaurant, and like instead of calling it fusion, just call it like contrived or something.
Fission.
Because that's kind of what we're talking about in terms, like in the sense that like all of it is fusion by definition. Almost all food that you're going to have is fusion by definition, versus having food that is contrived, meaning like contrived fusion, I guess. We've intentionally brought together these things in order to like have some kind of novelty effect that is going to be enjoyable for you.
Yeah. I guess that's what it is. It's like the degree of intentionality.
Right. Because when I hear fusion, there's a connotation for me that is this thing that I'm talking about. It's like I picture something that I find quite annoying in terms of like the style. It's like, here it is. It's kind of like this, like especially if I hear like Asian fusion, for example. I don't think of Saigon flour, which happens to serve many different types of Asian cuisines or whatever. I think of like a giant restaurant that's like sort of pretty upscale, I guess, overpriced, and is like contrived in terms of like what's there, or just like overdone in some kind of way. I definitely don't think of like this person said of something like the Gandhi Roti example. Are you guys on?
No, I agree with you. I think when I think of fusion, what's typically called fusion food, I think of like sort of lowbrow food, but like not actually lowbrow, like lowbrow high end. Yeah,
I know that's a pretty funny judgment that we're all making. This may say more about us than
like like mass premium food, basically. That's like generally inoffensive and like agreeable for most people, to most people.
This is like, our own like disdain for like King and Bay though, or something.
Yeah, maybe this is very opinionated.
So what would be the thing that's like signals like something's going to be different?
I think like you're literally not going to have Laganma chili crisp coming from China. You know, like things like that, like practically, or like a limitation of that. The focus on provenance is, I think, going to change a little bit, or could change. This is like me just like speculating, but depending on like relations with these different countries and the sources of like some of these sort of more provincial ingredients, we're gonna not have access to like these ingredients that we've come to call really authentic. That, and also like, you know, you have all these, like in Toronto at least, like we've had all these like different cultures come and like start tailored to a particular cuisine because of the access to those ingredients, which didn't exist before, which I think might also decrease because you're going to have less people and less access to those ingredients, or less like sort of international like people coming in and settling.
Is there any signal or evidence that the supply chain is going to be so permanently disrupted in this way that
I'm thinking? No, yeah. There isn't. This is speculation. That's what I said.
Something will happen restaurant trend-wise as a result, because restaurants, many will close and and new ones will open, and maybe some sort of like acceleration in turnover of like a trend emerging in restaurants, whatever that might be. I have no idea if people actually open restaurants at all at this time. I think the ghost kitchen thing is, I guess.
Yeah, it's just the dark kitchens, or just like home cooks delivering authentic but with substituted ingredients meals.
There's definitely a new food and beverage culture emerging in the city, and this may be true of many cities right now, directly as a result of COVID, which I welcome. You're not sitting down in the restaurant, you're getting takeout food and drink and so on, and it's like much more of a street food and drink culture. Like all of a sudden it seems to be legal to hold alcohol in public, or at least to be allowed. So
anyway, those are my half-formed thoughts about fusion food.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think there's something here in terms of, a category of signals. Like it seems like right now is a good time to be looking for like what the different food signals might be. Obviously, like an opportunity for different types of innovation and stuff like that too. All this signal or noise.
It's off the charts.
It's nothing.
I'm not convinced that there is a kind of a shift or whatever. I think all the things that people talk about around it, there could be something there, but it's too speculative to know even what it is to agree or disagree with it, I think. But I like the topic.
It's a good topic.
Yeah. I like talking about food.
It's a palatable topic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that the topic too, though, is very much a long time coming. I don't know. Is there something else in there? And it's weird. It feels like the moment to look at this is right, but maybe we haven't seen the signal yet. Like that's where I feel like I can't tell. It's like you've identified something here. Macy.
My signal is what's being called the Milk Tea Alliance. So it's a social media movement that has formed to reflect solidarity among different Asian democracies, so Taiwan, Hong Kong, Thailand, and Philippines. It came out of the Philippines, out of a meme war that sparked from a Thai celebrity referring to Hong Kong as a country, and pro-China trolls were criticizing him, and then Thai citizens basically came to his defense online. And then from there, it kind of sparked and inspired this like citizen-led, like transnational Pan-Asia partnership that they are calling the Milk Tea Alliance, because those countries have the custom of adding milk to their tea and, the popularity of the beverage, whereas in China, the preference is for black tea. I mean, it comes also with everything that's going on online now. I think there's this like, unifying potential despite everything else that the internet can be with misinformation, but also as well interesting to see activism being led, like from a very citizen-led perspective, to speak out against larger issues. So now they're using it to back different social and environmental issues. So there was this whole thing about the Mekong River and how research has shown that like China's control over the upper regions of it have caused a lot of droughts in the lower regions. And so again, they've kind of band together to raise awareness of this issue. And yeah, so.
What do you think the signal is, and what do you think it tells us?
It's interesting also like using food as like from an iconic, symbolic, almost revolutionary means. Like they have the slogan, milk tea is thicker than blood. So I think it's more just like, what are some of the things emerging in activism methods that is like tying in, technology and using it as a means to raise awareness and, create unity and solidarity.
Do you hear about the like milk being used as a symbol of like white nationalism in the last like 5 years, where like you had all these like white nationalists like show up to rallies and like basically chug milk and throw milk at people?
These guys ruin everything.
Sorry. Milk is a really interesting one because it's been like used in like a number of ways. Like I also think about in India, like there's the white revolution, which is like, all these like farmers kind of banding together over milk producers, and starting one of the largest cooperatives that exists, producer cooperatives that exist in Asia, Amul, which came out of the white revolution in India.
That is very interesting.
And then
tea also has a history.
Tea.
And Tea Party and
The tea, exactly, the Boston Tea Party. And there's a lot of like food symbolism in politics. Bread is like another one.
Just like to make it like maybe less about food for a second, I find one thing that's like interesting about calling it a milk tea alliance. There's something about this idea of almost like reaching for common ground, or the irreverence of the common ground that is selected here, that is interesting to me. That like, I'm trying to understand what's the signal in that. Is there some kind of statement about like sort of how we form alliances and find that saying it doesn't really matter? They're kind of being a little bit tongue-in-cheek about like what this common ground is. It's not actually the point in this case, has nothing to do with the politics in this case. It's just sort of like there's like some kind of humor involved in it, or some kind of fun involved in that. Seems to be a statement in itself in some way of like,
I think
how we relate and stuff like that.
For sure, I think. And also just using humor to bring attention, or like to fight back, like with meme wars, like all about like how to be clever with humor. They're not associating their identity with like their government, for example, and using humor, sometimes also like self-deprecating humor, to just be like, okay, whatever these trolls are saying, it doesn't matter. It can actually be funny, and let's all just find unity in that.
I find there's something that's like commonality is there if you're looking for it, as is contrast, I guess, is kind of like the point I read from it. You could read that alliance as almost a critique of the idea of race or something like that, and like all the conversations about like eugenics and like all these things. People make these arguments about like genetic superiority or genetic, and others make arguments that we shouldn't that we shouldn't talk about genetic differences and like things like that. And like on both cases, that is, clearly there are racial sort of genetic differences, among people, and clearly they can be like dangerous to look at in different ways, or to make certain claims about, or whatever. The meaninglessness and like irrelevance and irreverence of like finding certain things in common or in contrast among other people, like how easy it is to do and like how silly it is to make such a big deal out of certain ones.
Doesn't that just like reflect the natural course of niche formation online and finding commonalities? Like there's a Reddit thread for everything. Like for sure there's a milk tea Reddit thread somewhere that pre-existed this, or at least some kind of equivalent somewhere, Like people will find commonalities, but the thing I think of is like, terms of political effectiveness, does it go beyond the clicktivist thing? Does it lead to anything, or is it just like a fun kind of thing to engage with for like a few moments? And, it feels like it's the kind of thing that could be very easily used by other forces. Like a hashtag is like the easiest thing to hijack, like of all the kind of bonds that you can form with other people. It feels like the weakest kind of bond, right? Like it's not forged out of some intense experience where you have to sacrifice something. Like your bond to other people in the milk tea alliance is going to be necessarily rather weak if you haven't sacrificed anything for it.
Thinking about irreverence and like actual like political outcomes, this was reminding me of like the recent Robinhood like app. I guess it's not activism. It's like just like trolls basically, but like irreverent trolls, but like making a point of like investing in a way that is detrimental to like billionaires or whatever. And I think maybe we've talked about this before, but like a bunch of them like invested in the Hertz stock to drive it up, which basically led to like a number of billionaires, including Carl Icahn, losing a whole bunch of money, which is like activism in a sense. And it was based out of like an irreverent, like bunch of memes that were going around about this Hertz stock.
Right.
I guess also like in terms of hijacking hashtags, it's like, can you use it for good also? Like, you know, the K-pop fans basically drowning out White Lives Matter hashtag. I guess essentially it was similar to the concerns over the Blackout Tuesday drowning the Black Lives Matter hashtag and making it unusable in terms of having useful information on there. The K-pop fans used the White Lives Matter hashtag and drowned it with like Korean pop content instead.
K-pop fans may be the most powerful military in meme wars.
Like, I think there's something happening where like people can come together and have like real political change, or they can be real outcomes. And like, I think that's starting to happen through social media and beyond just like hashtag activism, clicktivism. So yes, I say signal.
About this?
I agree with what Udo said, but I think the points beyond it to that in this example for me, I mean, I don't know much about it, so maybe that's like the other thing. It's like there's a lot of context and a lot of history and a lot of like what came before and what comes after. But I'm skeptical whenever I hear about a hashtag somehow catalyzing change. I just think it's happened in ways that are quite negative before too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea that it's the catalyst versus just a part of something else too, I think is like, I don't think anyone would ever have said or made an argument that like make love, not war was the catalyst for something. It's just part of a movement, you know?
Yeah.
It's just sort of like it's just a slogan, right? And I feel like a hashtag is sort of the same in that way.
Well, that's where I don't know enough about like all the countries aligned in this alliance against mainland China to be able to say what it really means. I have no idea. There might be something quite significant there. I really don't know.
Yeah. Interesting as a signal in itself that we've had these two sort of like food and nation. Is there anything going on? It feels like it's something that's always going on, this sort of like food politics, food diplomacy. There's an interesting relationship, I think, though, in some of these examples between how hard-lined people can be about their food preferences. I'm going to say signal for reasons I don't know yet, but I agree signal in the sense that I suspect there's something going on here. Valdez, what's your weakest signal?
There's a group called the Social Dreaming International.
The Social Dreaming International?
Yeah, the Social Dreaming International. And I really hoped it was like the third international or the fifth international, a kind of like communist organization of some kind, but it's not. It's just it's more of a therapy thing. But they have a big mission and to expand beyond just like therapeutic applications. But it's apparently started in the 80s, but 2019 when the International was founded, the organization. And they allow you to get trained as they don't like the word facilitator, they use the word host. But the basic idea is that you like as a group tell your dreams to each other and try to think through the associations of what the dream says as an index to broader social forces that are going on.
That's great.
to be able to understand why you might be feeling in particular ways, how your broader social environment might shape your individual psychological state. There's a lot of little details that are kind of funny, like they call them dream matrices that you have to fill out. I don't fully understand the idea, but it seems to be some kind of like it's the process basically. So they use like matrices, and then you have to sit in a star shape format because they want to maintain a sense of individuality but also commonality. So a circle would be too commonality and too group oriented, but a star shape is apparently the right balance of individual and collective, which I think is kind of hilarious. Yeah, I don't know what else about it.
The dreams you're talking about, like as in dreams that you have when you're like sleeping, or dreams that you have like as a person?
Your aspirations or your...
like aspirations.
Yeah.
Oh, no. Little dreams. There's transcripts and stuff of some of the groups online. It's kind of fun because you get to read people sharing dreams one after the other and then trying to find commonalities in them. Yeah, but very literal dreams.
I always wonder, like, because on the internet, it's like if you have a dream, you can Google and within 5 seconds have like a few interpretations of your dreams that have like risen to the top of Google for whatever reason. And they're just like they're like, at the about.com in Quora, like equivalents and like all that shit. And where these interpretations come from, and like I'm interested in like the body of knowledge that comes from it. I kind of trust that they're coming from sources of people who have dedicated their lives to it, and then like others have taken them and iterated and like I kind of trust that, but I have no idea. I'm so curious about the stories of like determining meaning of dreams and like where that's begun, how it's happened over time, and how it gets modernized in particular.
Well, I think there's a deeper question of like, is the scientific method appropriate to dreams? Not that dreams are not a material force, like of course they are. They're composed of stuff going on in the brain, but like the level of complexity that they're operating at, like the tools of science don't seem to me at least to be the most efficient way of understanding. Like I think literature and like other mechanisms might be a little more powerful for getting insights out of dreams.
I think there's a combination though that could be fruitful of sort of more humanistic and more scientific approaches to understanding dreams.
Yeah,
they would probably be better than one or the other, and for understanding some things anyways.
I think of practically in the last 100 years, has any of the scientific approaches to dreaming given me any tool to further my understanding of them? Like, I would say no.
It's like the space where you need to like use some of the tools of science with a different kind of looseness, which is the challenge, I guess. Like to me, it relates a lot to the conversations we've had about like biocentrism and stuff like that, and how we understand reality, and that, yeah, there's like something else here that's like, it's maybe not science, that it needs to borrow from science. And like, how do you do that without going into a sort of dangerously confusing pseudoscientific territory? And just like economic approaches that can be combined easily with like literature and the humanities, where you're just kind of like doing data analysis and like counting citation, how many people interpret things this way and why and stuff like that. But you might be right. And more anecdotal stuff might be useful.
For you to be able to do a scientific experiment, you want to have like your lab bench be created in a way that your experiments are repeatable and like observable by multiple different observers, so that you can experiment, probe, provide peer feedback and critique in a way that's like, I don't know, you can do with dreams. How do you like get someone else to dream the dream that you had, or play back the dream that you had? If there's a way to do that, maybe, but I think that would have to happen at like a neurochemical level, which is like a different thing.
It'd be like almost saying like, can you do a scientific study of human memoirs? It's like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know, isn't it just more valuable to like read the memoir using the techniques of like literary analysis? And what you're trying to get at is hyperspecificity, not like a generalization about like all humans at all times. But I mean, that's what I don't like about the archetypal approach to dreams. I think that is less interesting to me. Like, I think dreams probably change with time, and symbols change and whatnot, and the way it operates and what it does probably varies probably based on even some of these practices. So like if you have a practice of social dreaming and the way you think about dreaming is different, I think that probably affects the kind of dreams you have too.
Mm-hmm. To your point about archetype, and just to go away from my tangent and back to the original signal, like the archetype piece seems very relevant here for like this seems like this is in some way about updating the archetypes and like symbols and things like that. And in fact, I guess my privacy breach thing though is kind of connected to that. Like that was such a contemporary experience to be predicted or to have a premonition about, and such a literal sort of one-to-one, like from the interpretation to what happened the next day. It's interesting, but I don't know. I'm curious, Fathers, how you see that fitting in with this idea of like social dreaming, and like, is it about creating a body of literature about dreams and what they mean in terms of like our modernity or like our contemporary experience?
I don't think this like one-to-one symbology is going to be that useful or that interesting. Like this idea that there's like a dictionary or a language of like coded references. I mean, you could take that to different degrees of complexity, and there's some way maybe that it can help you think about it. I don't think they like stand like over time. Like I don't think they go back to like the deepest recesses of like the human mind and experience over time. I don't know if that's what was being implied by the word archetype, but that's what I think of usually. But I think the idea is to surface common images and common relationships and common situations and stuff like that, and kind of pay attention to how they change over time. So in that sense, there's a kind of like shared consciousness thing that they're trying to get at, I guess, which would relate to the Jungian archetype question.
Right.
You know, they're trying to use the dream as a mechanism to access like this, pulsing of vibes and whatnot that go on in the present.
The pulsing vibes of the present.
There's something cool about it for sure. Do you know anything about these matrices? Like what is the approach? Like what is the process of like mining these dreams and like revealing information?
Well, I have my hands on a matrix actually right now. I don't have the host guide, but it's you pay like £3,000.
Oh man.
Starting to sound like a scam. Is that how you found it?
Hardly social.
Well, it's based out of a mental health hospital or institution in the UK. It's like different psychiatrists and I guess actually psychoanalysts. What
are the like commonalities and dreams that people have today? And the reason why I'm thinking about that right now is like, do you guys hear about like all the UFO talk that's been going around? Like, you know, people have been talking about UFOs are kind of back in the discourse because like the New York Times like wrote about them, you know, like a few months ago. It was during like, I don't know, the 70s and 80s. It was like 60s, 70s, 80s. So it was like this time where people had like all these collective dreams about UFO experiences. And that was just like a characteristic dream of the time.
Right.
And like people have been looking back and talking about like what that might have meant, like where were they, like what was influencing those dreams, and like what are the sort of cultural things that are happening right now that are informing the kinds of dreams that people have?
The leap between UFOs and that, by the way, is like so insane, right? Like when you actually like a UFO just means phenomena in the sky. That's all. Then like it's so tied to like culturally to like the idea that phenomenon in the sky is aliens, saucers that are landing, abducting you, and like doing all these other, you know what I mean? There's so much imagination going on and the like cultural imagination happening between these things.
And I guess a lot of that is interweaving and stitching together happens in your dreams, right?
Yeah.
Like the creativity and like the connection making is happening like while you're asleep.
I wonder if they can use this like social dreaming method for hallucinations or, you know, experiences that you have when you're under the influence.
Like to share them with each other?
Yeah, and also just like to think deeper and make associations with like things that you are seeing when you're hallucinating, because that can also be like a source of creativity.
I wonder if that's like what guides do, like ayahuasca guides and stuff like that, because it seems like it would be rife for the kind of like symbol interpretation. And isn't it known for that actually, for generating lots of like images and symbols and things like that?
Yeah,
I would think so, right? I don't know.
So I wonder if they operate that way as a way to share what you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that people haven't like harnessed the social element of dreaming. It's often been like the way psychoanalysis treated it, it's been very individualized, right? Like your dream means something to you, you know, like the way like a palm reader or whatever, like it's all about you, you know? Whereas the social dreaming idea is that it's like an index to something bigger.
It just seems so rich in terms of what's there to be learned, to be mined, or to explore, to be an aeronaut or whatever. And yet it just seems like in general, society pays not nearly enough attention to our dreams.
Like, I don't even remember most of my dreams.
But the thing is, if you devote attention to it before bed and in the morning, you will. That's my experience when I have. You can do a lot more if you devote time and attention to it. It almost seems like that's where we should, if we're not practicing religion or something like that, like put that part of our daily energy or something.
Like, what kinds of things are you hoping to like get out of it? Or is it just like unexplored and you're like, you just want to see what you can?
Learning things about yourself, maybe tapping into like, I mean, I think there's like all this like sort of ancestral experience that you might be able to tap into. I think also just purely like experiences that you are probably way more interesting than the average day of waking life that we go through. You know what I mean? I just find it's weird that we experience it, we acknowledge it. It seems to be awesome in the true sense of the word awesome. Yet we just kind of,
I don't know. When you were talking about that, I was thinking about like all the sort of like metaverse ideas and like new kinds of realities that are created through digital technologies. But this is a real reality, you know, that exists that we have access to. It's a real alternative reality.
Real surreal reality.
It's a surreality that we have access to, that we don't exploit.
Better than anything Travis Scott can do in Fortnite. It's work. I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about how like the same criticisms of media are always made as new media emerge, and it's because new medias allow us to be lazier and lazier. I think that those criticisms are actually like right, and we are like and have been right every time, every generation and of technology, of media technology that we've gotten. It's like, and how we use them. They do achieve some new things, but mostly they require less of us as viewers, readers, audiences, and it seems adjacent to that.
But I wonder if like the reason why dreams are like underemphasized is because they only exist in this sort of realm of the individual, and they're not, you know, really social experiences. I guess that's the point, Alice, you were making, which is why it's interesting
to share
this project.
Dream Club thing.
Yeah,
I think so. The like lack of coherence maybe makes some difference too. Although life's pretty incoherent a lot of times. But we do seem to crave coherence, I guess is the point. Like that's part of the work thing.
Imagine there was a dream registry instead of Facebook. It was like a dream book where like everybody's dream had to be recorded every day that they put in. So you could like look up like the president's dreams or the prime minister's dreams or like your coworkers' dreams or whatever.
What kind of dystopic reality do you want to live in, Alice?
It's not like automated. You'd have to write it yourself. So there's a degree of voluntarism of what you want to divulge or not. I'm sure people would try to manipulate it. And presidents would try to have better dreams than they really do. But one can dream.
I like what Macy was getting at too, though. Is like the one other reason to like devote attention would just be like tool for creativity. Like a lot of the greatest thinkers and inventors were more active in like exploring their dreams than most of us are. Just like using those in between states as a way to ideate and stuff.
In between states, especially not necessarily, but maybe that's what I don't know. I don't really.
And they're all in between at some point.
Yeah. Like if you can cross over from dream to real, there has to be an in between.
Yeah, if you can remember it at all, there's
an in between,
some waking aspects to it. Yeah.
I would like to say signal, but I think it's noise because I just think a lot of people have done like interesting dream experiments. Like I don't think this is going to lead to like a big social dreaming kind of change.
Macy?
I would say signal. I think also there is instilling an individual practice or like motivating people to instill kind of that individual practice as well as like being able to share that socially. I guess I would like it to be signal, and now I'm also motivated to think more about my dreams. So
yeah, for me, this definitely falls in the category of hope it's a signal. But then I think I need to listen to it and say who would probably tell me, so make it a signal.
Well, a signal is not about probability. It's about what the potential impact of this could be.
Could be. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It does signal a potential, shift in our attention towards dreams. And I think we could find more signals that point to that if we wanted to. We can find signals.
Sure, we could find signals that point in the opposite direction too.
Or a lack of signals.
Like the replacement of any kind of dreaming with like prefabricated dreams and something like that. Like there's times when there's certain like dream interface projects that go on at certain unnamed institutions that elements of them can be really like exciting and interesting, like using sound and color and whatever. But then other times it's like, oh, this is just like a gimmicky way to commercialize the night, right? Like to create a slew of kind of prefabricated dream experiences that can be sold to people, and they're not really about
like getting what's really there. Okay, podcast from later.